Well, good morning, saints. Good morning, sinners. That was an impromptu poll, and looks like we're pretty split even there. You guys doing good? Have you recovered from the hurricane yet? Are you like emotionally tired still though? A little bit. Some of you, maybe. I am glad that we survived. I'm glad to the generosity of this church to give towards helping those in need, and it's been a blessing this week to see God's people at work. Not just some of our guys up on the barn over here repairing the roof. That made me nervous, but to see what God is doing at some of our churches in Southwest Florida, God's doing some neat stuff down there, and we are blessed to be part of it. And we've been going through the life of Joseph over the last couple weeks. So if you're brand new here, we're jumping in almost at last week was like the climax of the story. It was Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. He lets them know that God had put him in that place of authority and in Egypt for such a time as this, right? That to preserve life, to be the redeemer of the children of Israel from the great famine. And then he sends his brothers away to go get dad. And now today Jacob is coming for that reuniting of his family, bringing his family back together, that reunion. And no doubt he has got a lot of questions. First of all, I thought Joseph was dead, and now Joseph's alive. And coming back, he's faced with some doubts and some fears, and I think we all would be if we were kind of going through life and we were getting to the end of our life and things were things were rough, and as we kind of coasted into to our last days, all of a sudden you get this shocker that the son that you thought died 22 years ago is actually alive, and not only is he alive, but he is in charge. And so Jacob is faced with some fears as he returns back to Joseph. And we have plenty to be afraid of this week, right? Yes? If you're not afraid, let me tell you some reasons why you could be afraid. Our world's a mess. We are, I think, there was a gentleman in Washington, D.C. that used the word Armageddon this week. Like, that'll wake you up. I had no idea we were that far along in the book of Revelation. But the global instability is, if you don't have something to be afraid of, there you go. It's a freebie. You can have that. We're dealing with all kinds of oil shortages, and as a result of that, there is a shortage of fertilizer, which is what they use to grow food. And so there's famine to be afraid of, maybe not for us, but maybe for us down the road. And we have those kind of fears. And then we're not getting any younger, people. One of the things that we fear is getting older, and who's going to take care of me. I'm counting on Sister Faye to take care of me when I get old, but I don't know. She's my plan, though. That's all I got. But we as we get older, and so here is Jacob, and Jacob is facing a famine. He's facing a global crisis that is now all of a sudden, everything is up in the air. He is 130 years old. Yeah, I know. You thought I was old. And now he's got to travel. And so he's got all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that our stuff is as bad as his stuff, but he's got stuff. He's got stuff to be afraid of. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look how he meets that fear with faith. And we're going to look at the God that is faithful. And we've been looking at Joseph over the last couple of months. We've looked at the faithfulness of Joseph, that Joseph wasn't just coated in a coat of many colors, that he was coated in faithfulness. Whether from the pit to the prison to the palace, he was faithful every step of the way. But the reason he was able to be faithful is because God is faithful. And we're going to see Jacob, as he's met with all of these fears, we're going to watch him meet those fears with faith. If you'll stand with me, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 46. We may backtrack to chapter 45. But let's stand in honor of God's word. The Bible tells us in verse 1, so Israel, that's Jacob's name given by God, Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the vision of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to him. So they took their livestock and their goods which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, and his daughters and his sons' daughters. And all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. You may be seated. I want us to look at Jacob's fear. I want us to understand what things he were afraid of. We mentioned just a few of them there, but Jacob is getting ready to make a passage. He's getting ready to take a journey, right? He's going to be moving. Who said moving or traveling? That's a scary thing sometimes. It's like we don't really get afraid of traveling. Why? Because we have all the world's knowledge in our back pocket. Right? We know where every gas station is. We got our little gas buddy to let us know how we can save 15 cents at the next fill up. We don't worry about food for the journey because there is billboards placard every mile telling us where the next McDonald's is. We don't worry about traveling as much as you had to worry about traveling. We don't worry about whether there's going to be water once we get halfway across the desert to Egypt. We don't know, there's no billboard along I-70 Egypt to tell you where the wells are to find water to keep yourself from dying. Right? So he's getting ready to make a passage. Now, crazily, he jumps right into it. In chapter 46, verse 1, we don't really see him pausing before he jumps in. He's just like, let's go. My son is alive, man, and the chariots pull up in front of the house, and it's like a limo, right? I mean, he's traveling in style. Do you remember that limo? When we took the kids on a youth trip, we had someone back in the day. I'm talking to Sister Faye. We had our kids in our youth group. When we first started, like year one, we had like 7 kids. We took them. We didn't have transportation, but one of our people had a limousine company. We took our kids to play putt-putt in a limousine. I'm telling you, that was amazing. Nowadays, we don't do that anymore. But he just jumped right in the car, and they were off. And he's making this journey, and I know that he's impulsive, right? And sometimes when you get green lights, you just kind of like jump through, right? And jump through the hoops. Like, oh, wow, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go see my kid. And I tell you what, if I thought my son had died 22 years ago and I find out he's alive, I don't care where he is in the middle of Antarctica, I'm going to go see him. Right? And so this is Jacob's heart. I'm going to go find my kid. I'm going to go be reunited. And not only that, but we're experiencing a famine here. They got food in Egypt. And so he begins to take the steps, and he begins to move forward, and he begins to go that way. And then he starts to think, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't such a good idea. That just because I have a cart in front of me, just because I have my son at the end of the road, maybe I ought to stop and think about this. And I don't know what kind of fears he was dealing with, but I know he was dealing with fears because in verse 3, God says, Jacob, Jacob, do not fear, right? So we know he was having fear because God told him to not fear. That's a pretty good indication. So there's a lot of people who are afraid and they refuse to admit they're afraid. But when God says don't fear, that's a pretty good indication that there's fear there. And we got a lot of stuff to be afraid of, but we also have God. And so Jacob begins this journey. And I don't know, but maybe as he's going along the way and he's traveling from Canaan and he's kind of heading south towards Egypt, that he begins to think, because you have time to think while you're riding in a cart, and you begin to think about, well, you know what, my wife passed away on a journey just like this. His beloved wife Rachel had passed away while traveling. And maybe he thought, well, I am getting older and I'm 130, and maybe this isn't the best idea. Or maybe he started to think and have the worry that some parents have, is like, I'm taking my kids to go live in Egypt. Right? One of the struggles that us parents have is like, we are bringing our kids into this next generation. Like, what's the world's going to be for them? And I don't know that he says, I'm taking all of my descendants from the promised land of God down to Egypt where they worship false gods. And maybe if I bring them down there, they might convert and become Egyptians. God has called us to be separate. God has brought us out of this area, and He brought us down there. I really don't know that I want my kids growing up in that town, right? In that environment, going to those schools, being taught those things. I think these are very valid concerns that he would have. And so he's making a passage, and the beauty of it is as he's making the passage, he does something that I think is important for us. He hits the pause button. He stops in Beersheba. And Beersheba is, as you're talking about Israel, they would talk about Israel, and they would say, you know what, from the top of Israel to the bottom, and they would say from Dan to Beersheba. It was kind of the way that they described the whole of the country. And so we know that since he's in Beersheba, that he is all the way at the bottom. He's getting ready to leave the promised land. And before he leaves the promised land, he does this. You guys, get out your remote controls. Get them out. You got it. Come on, people. Ken's the only one. All right, got your remote controls? Come on. Listen, I'm not going to preach until y'all cooperate. Hit that pause button. Come on. Sometimes in life, you're going to have green lights. You're going to get offered the job of your dreams. Someone's going to offer to pay more for your house than it's worth, and you know it. Right? And you're going to, man, all the lights are all green, and you're like, this is a no-brainer, I'm moving forward. And if you do so without first stopping, pulling out the remote and hitting the pause button, then you might make the same mistake that others have made. When they jump from the frying pan into the flame. Yeah, fire. You were right, I was just teasing. We do that all the time. It's like, well, this is a no-brainer. Of course I ought to take this job. Of course I ought to move to Florida. Of course I ought to do this and do that. And so he is headed south, like you Quebec people. Where are my Quebec people? Okay, there you are. He's headed south, and he's going to the sunshine state of Egypt, and he gets to Beersheba, and he's getting ready to leave the promised land. And all of a sudden he hits the pause button. He says, you know what? I better check with God before I go through this wide open door. And the reason he needed to do that is because both his grandfather and his father had found themselves in the same trouble. In fact, over in Genesis 26, 20 chapters earlier, it says there was a famine in the land besides the first famine. So if you're doing the math, Abraham had famine number 1. Isaac had world famine number 2, and now Jacob is dealing with famine number 3. It says there was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Here's our struggle. We are going through life. We hit a problem. We hit a famine. We hit a dry spot. We lose our job. We lose our house. We lose our loved one, our marriage, our kid. And all of a sudden we're like, I need change. And we turn to the world for the solution. We turn to the world for the answer. Egypt in the type of the Bible is always the world. So when God sent Joseph into Egypt, it's a picture of God sending Jesus into the world. Right? And so when we look at Egypt, what happened with Abraham is things got tough. He started going through a famine. God called him to the promised land, and Abraham is in the promised land, but yet all of a sudden a famine comes along, and he's like, oh no, I'm in the wrong spot. So where do I turn? And he turned to the world. And as we see Abraham going and turning to the world and going down to Egypt for his rescue, rather than turning to God for his rescue, he begins to make some really bad decisions. Do you remember when he was in Egypt, he lied that his wife was really his sister? Like, that's a bad, listen, guys, listen, marriage advice. Never do that. Right? The bad idea. But Egypt, here he is, and he turned to Egypt to be the solution of his problem rather than turning to God. And so when the famine number 2 comes along, and Isaac is getting ready, and he's kind of tilting the same way, right? Isaac starts to go down to the king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Philistines are the bad guys, right? And so what God steps in, he's like, hold on a minute, Isaac, before you make the same mistake that Abraham made, let me stop you right here and let me tell you in chapter 26, verse 2, do not go to Egypt. And now it's Jacob's turn. And where's Jacob headed? Egypt. He's got all the green lights. It's like, listen, if you find out that your son is there and you thought he was dead for 22 years, ain't nobody stopping me. If a chariot, like an Egyptian chariot, I'm not talking about like the chariot on Mount Canaan or whatever. It's not, like they just discovered the wheel. I'm talking about those Egyptian chariots that are covered in gold, right? Probably pulled by stallions. I don't know. I just had this mental picture. Right? And all of a sudden the limousine shows up and you got all the green lights. And what does Jacob do that was different than Abraham, that was different than Isaac? He did what? He reached in the pocket, he pulled out the remote control, and he hit the pause button. He says, before I leave God's promised land, before I turn to Egypt for my solution to my very real problem, before I turn to Egypt for the love of my son, let me stop right here and make sure that I have God's permission. And all through life, we make decisions. Are we going to go here? Are we going to go there? Are we going to take this job? Are we going to take that job? Are we going to sell our house, or are we going to buy a house? Or are we going to get married to Mr. or Mrs. Right? Good night. We got these decisions to make. And the question is, are we going to be thoughtful enough, like Jacob was, to stop in Beersheba, to pause our passage before we make a very big mistake? Jacob hits the pause button. It's a brilliant move. And I think because he did, God answered him and God gave him permission. Look at verse 3. It says, so he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. So Jacob gets permission. And I think one of the takeaways for us as a people is we all are making decisions all the time. We have decisions to make about everything. And what may be a sinful decision for Abram in not trusting God, now for the exact same decision. Abraham had a famine. He turned to Egypt. He went down to Egypt. Abraham sinned. Now is his grandson Jacob, the exact same thing. Famine. Where's the solution to the famine? In Egypt. It's not sin. Right? It wasn't sin. Why? Because God gave him permission. He says, don't be afraid to go down there. I'm going to go with you. We're going to have a good old time, and then I'll bring you back home. And sometimes in life, what may be sin for somebody, a display of a lack of faith, is not sin for somebody else. I'm not talking about things that are vulgar sins that we all know are sins. I'm talking about, application of faith things. Like, how am I going to respond when there's imagine a worldwide, sickness. Imagine and they come out with a jab. They come out with a vaccine. And some Christians say, you can't have that vaccine. That would be sin to trust the government. It would be sin to trust, science. It would be sin to do this. And you have other Christians in it, and they're like, yes, roll up my sleeve for me, Here we go. And so within the body of Christ, you have some people making one decision, some people making another decision, and we're arguing over whether it's sin or not, when it really comes down to the individual. Right? And the individual has to make a decision in their own heart, for their own life, for their own family. Am I going to do this because I'm not trusting God like Abraham didn't trust God, or like Jacob because, I'm trusting God? And so that's just a small example, but it happens all the time that we make decisions. Why? Because we have a personal relationship with God. And sometimes God speaks to one person one way and says, by all means, go down to Egypt. That's where the solution to your problem is. And to other people, God says, listen, I want you to stay in your trouble and I want you to trust me. Hurricane comes through. Do you run away from the hurricane or do you ride it out? Well, that's between you and God. Right? It's like you talk to God about what God would have for you and your family. You hit that pause button and you hit your knees and you're like, God, I've got this thing coming. And I don't know what to do about it. God, I just lost my job. My wife just walked away. God, the doctor just called and he said the C word. And now, am I gonna have faith to just like, okay, I want to trust God in this circumstances, or am I going to actually get the surgery done? And if I get the surgery done, am I not trusting God? Well, it's an individual thing, and we just trust God. We just hit the pause button. Say, God, would you have me to do this? God, would you have me to go here? Would you have me to take this vaccine? Would you? And the rest of us, you know what we do? Start over here, and you go. Right? And why? Because let God lead in the lives of people. The challenge for us is a lot of times we see the doors wide open, we see the chariots outside, we see the green light, and we hop in the bus, and we never pay attention to hit the pause button and say, God, would you have me participate in this? God, would you have me to do this? Jacob made a decision based upon the faithfulness of God, and I want you to look at how he met his fears with faith. The first thing we see is that he had faith in the provision of God. God's provision is amazing. God's provision is over the top. If you weren't here last Sunday, let me read back what we did last week. In 45 verse 23, Joseph sent to his father these things. This is the provision of God. 10 donkeys loaded with good things of Egypt. 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. Probably beef jerky. He sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the limousines which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And then Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. See, he had faith in the provision of God. That he saw the provisions. When he saw the carts. Like they said, hey, listen, we got a story to tell you. He didn't believe their story, but when he saw the carts, he saw the provision. He saw the hand of God in it. All of us, from time to time, if we are God's people, will probably have a story of some time when God stepped into our problem and provided an answer. And I don't know when yours is. I don't know when that happened for you. But our God is a God who is a provider. And so Jacob sees the provision of God. And it is something that helps bolster his faith. We get the word provision from the Latin It's the same place we get the word video. You guys know what a video is? Right, a video is it's a depiction, it's a picture, it's a moving picture of audio and visual of something. Pro means before, right? What we understand is that Jacob is dealing with a reality. He's dealing with a famine. He's got the limousines outside. He's going across the desert to find his son. And he puts faith in God because of the provision of God. God's provision for us means that God saw it before it happened. And God already made plans before October 9th, 2022. God already saw today. He saw your today. He's already seen what's going to happen in your day. And for God to have seen it means that God already saw it. He already provided. He already videoed your life. God knows what's in your future. And so one of the things that we can do when we are experiencing faith issues with fear is we say, you know what? Let me look at what God has done in the past, because past is prologue. What God did in the past shows what God can do in the future. So that means that when Jacob had wrestled with God the night before he went to go see his brother Esau, that he knew that God was in his life. No doubt he had heard the stories of his grandfather Abraham taking his dad Isaac up the mountain. That story probably got told so many times that it was roll your eyes worthy at the Thanksgiving table. Like, there goes Isaac again, talking about grandpa, taking him up on the mountain and sacrificing him to God. He knew the story. What did they call that place? Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Because here he is, Abraham, and he's got the knife held up, getting ready to sacrifice his son, and God stops him. And there's a ram caught in a thicket. It's God's provision. And one of the things that helps us when we are dealing with a famine, when we're dealing with a failure, when we're dealing with a struggle, is to look at the provision of God in the past. And God's been faithful. Has God been faithful? If He's been faithful, then He can still be faithful. You come to a river and the waters part, you can walk across. Why? Because God did it before. God did it at the Red Sea. God can do it at the Jordan. And the reality for you and the reality for me is that one of the things that bolsters our faith is when God shows up and God says, I am God. That's the first thing He says in verse 3. Like, Jacob, Jacob, I am God. Now, in the Bible, there's a comma there, but I want to put a period. Like, that's enough, right? I'm God. I can do whatever, right? Trust me. Do not fear. A second thing that conquers fear is the fact that God's Redeemer was alive. Joseph is a type of Christ. And the simple fact that Joseph was still alive kind of made the decision for Jacob. It didn't matter how bad the journey was. There was just too good an opportunity to see Joseph. And I love verse 28 of chapter 45. It says, Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Joseph was the Redeemer, the type of Christ. Let me tell you, we have a Redeemer who is still alive. And so it doesn't matter what kind of fears we have. If we have a Redeemer who is alive, then it is enough. Jacob said, it is enough that Joseph is alive. That word is the Hebrew word rob. And that word means that it is not just sufficient, it's more than sufficient. He didn't need just enough evidence to go to Egypt. It was more evidence. It was worth, the fact that Joseph was alive was worth more than everything. And I will tell you, as Christians, one of the things that's enough for us is the fact that Jesus is alive is worth everything. It doesn't matter what you might be afraid of. It doesn't matter how bad the boogeyman is. It doesn't matter how big the crisis is. Jesus is enough. And our faith in Him overcomes our fear. And so we have faith in God's provision because it's amazing. We have faith in our Redeemer because He's alive. And then we have faith in God's promises because they're assuring. And so God gives 3 assuring promises here to Jacob. He said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. And then he begins and he gives them 4 promises. He says, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. 4 promises that God makes to him. The first one there is, I will make of you a great nation there. Right? This is important because he was afraid to go there. That was the scary part. That was the world. That was the thing that Abraham got in trouble for. And what God is saying is that God is not limited by distance or location. That the promised land is here, but my promises aren't only possible here. And my promises extend even to there. You ever heard of a God-forsaken town? There ain't no such place. The reality is that the God who is faithful in the promised land can also remain faithful there in Egypt. I think one of the struggles for the nation of Israel is that they have taken the promise of the Messiah and they have made it about the land. You look at the history of Israel, and even today they worship the land, the holy land. And what God is saying here is, listen, take off your shoes, for every place you stand is holy ground. Right? I'm the same God in Egypt as I am. Listen, you don't have to come to church to experience God. You can experience God in your living room or in your bedroom or out on the lake or at work. This is just a place where we gather, but you ought to know that the same God who can do miracles here can do miracles there. And so that tomorrow when you get up and you put on your work boots and you go to the job site, that God can do and God can work there as much as He works here on Sundays. He also works on Mondays. And so, Jacob, have faith in the promise that I will make of you a great nation there. Secondly, I will go with you. Oh, that's a good one. You want to have faith that overcomes fear? Know that God is with you. If you know that God is with you, there's no scary place. So when you're like a little kid and your dad is with you, man, you think your dad can beat up everybody. I remember my dad took karate in like high school and some in college, and I don't know whether he ever made it to black belt. I'll have to ask my mom over lunch, but I thought my dad could kick anybody's rear end. As a kid, I thought he was a big guy. I just thought he could handle whatever problem. And you know what? That overcomes fear. Why? Because you have faith. And what would you do if you knew that God was with you? Where would you go? Where would you not go if you thought God was with you? Hebrews chapter 13 says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For He Himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not, what, class? Fear. What can man do to me? You're afraid to go to Egypt? Guess what? I'm going to go with you. Great. I like how the writer of Hebrews says that we may boldly say. We don't say it timidly. We may boldly brag. What can man do to me? Why? Because God's with us. Jesus says it this way in Matthew 28. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, time, even to the end of the age. He is always with us, no matter where we're at, that we have the promise that God will go with us, even in our sharing of our faith, even in our mission work. He goes with us. And not only will He go with us, but He will bring us back up again. The third promise there. We have a similar promise as believers that no matter what happens to us in this life, that Jesus has gone before us and that Jesus will bring us back. John chapter 14, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. We have a promise from our God, not only that He will provide, and boy, because He has provided in the past, He can provide in the future. Not only will He go with us, but He will bring us back again. And so here we have these promises, one after another. God is just like, He's just like rapid fire. Go. Don't be afraid, because I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to be God there just like I am here. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to bring you back again. And then He gives this really interesting one. And He says this, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. That's weird. What that means, in an artistic way, is that you will die in peace with your beloved Son beside you, and He will be the one to close your eyelids. Right? Just kind of a beautiful picture of peace. God says, listen, I know you're afraid. You're 130 years old. You have no business crossing the desert. But don't be afraid, because first of all, I'm going to provide. Look, I've already provided. I've already sent you all these provisions. Yes, I used Pharaoh to do it. Yes, I used Joseph to do it. But man, the limousine's there, and I have already arranged all of this. Not only that, but I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to bring you back up again. And you will live out your days with your family. And when your time to pass comes, you will be cared for all the way to the end. And your beloved Joseph will be the guy who, after you pass, will put his hands on your eyes. Listen, we have a peace that comes from God, that no matter what happens in this world, that we have a promise to the next. And that God will provide that peace through every step of the way. Are there things to be afraid of today? After last week, absolutely. I don't know what's going to happen this week. I haven't read the news yet today, so I'm not 100% sure. I don't know what's happened since, like last time I looked at my phone was like 6:30 this morning. So maybe something's happened you guys know and I don't know. But we have fears. We have fears about global unrest. We have fears about famine and need. We have fears about the world that we're bringing our kids into. And God says, listen, you meet those fears with faith. Faith in the provision of God. Faith in the person of God, that He's with us and His presence is with us. Faith that He will provide and bring us home to be with Him again. God is not slack concerning His promises. And so this journey of Jacob is actually even a fulfillment of a promise that God made to Abraham. I don't know if Jacob realized it at the moment, but there's a prophecy all the way back in Genesis 15 to his grandfather Abraham. In verse 12 it says, now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards they shall come out with a great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. So here is Jacob, and maybe Jacob knew this passage of Scripture as well, that God was going to use this as a fulfillment of prophecy. Yes, the children of Israel would go into bondage. They would be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. But then they would come out of that slavery. They would come out of that place with great possessions and with great blessing. And they would go in. Abraham had one child, one legitimate child, Isaac. Isaac had Jacob and Esau, two brothers that didn't get along. God had promised Abraham multitudes, as many as the stars in the skies, and up to this point, he's had 3. Jacob fixes that, has 12. They leave and they arrive in Egypt with somewhere probably 70 people. The descendants of Jacob are now to 70, but there will be 2 million that will leave. They will come out as a great nation. God has blessed his family. And so we look at that and we say, okay, are there fears? Yes. Is there faith? Yes. Faith for the future, faith for the family. And so we see this family of blessing, Jacob's fears overcome by Jacob's faith, and that faith would lead to his family's future. That family grows and it multiplies through multiplication over and over and over. And the rest of this chapter is all genealogy. So we only hung out in a couple of verses because the rest of it is just begats, and we're not going to waste a lot of time. But if you want a little Easter egg to look at, look up Genesis 46:13. One of Jacob's grandkids is a guy by the name of Job. We're not claiming, but it's kind of interesting. Some people believe this is Job. That's Job from the Bible, and no doubt would predate Moses and the writing of the penning of the story of Genesis. And so here's these genealogies, and what is it? It's a fulfillment that God had been faithful. This multiplication, God has been faithful. God brought all of these descendants in. In verse 31, it says, then, after all the genealogies, then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. And so not only is Jacob's family enjoying the multiplication, but they're also enjoying Joseph's mediation. Joseph begins to tell Pharaoh about his family, about what they do. And he begins to give them, in this passage, Pharaoh gifts them the land of Goshen. Goshen means like a big pile of soil. And it's up in the delta area of northern Egypt, where the Nile would spill out into the Mediterranean. The Nile is one of those few rivers that flows north. And so it's all the nutrients of all of Egypt is brought, and it's there in the land of Goshen, a great place to raise livestock. And so, man, God used Joseph, and he blessed Jacob's family with multiplication, with Joseph's mediation, and then also with Joseph's ministry of continuing to care for them, because they still had 5 years of famine. The reality is, as we go through life, there are going to be some things that we're going to have to face, some fears. Life is scary. There's world economic tribulation. There's getting old. There's what kind of world are we bringing our kids into? But as we meet those fears with faith, God is faithful and God provides. Why? Because he's made promises to us. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. Let's bow our heads. Maybe you're here today and you've yet to accept that Jesus is your Christ. Right there where you're sitting, it's a great time to say, God, I'm a sinner, but I believe Jesus died on the cross for my sins. To have a conversation with God, a prayer of faith. God, I trust you for my soul salvation. If you've never done that, I would encourage you to pray and talk to God today. Then to let us know so that we can encourage you and follow up with you and help you take the next steps in your walk with God. Because as a church, probably a lot of us have already made that decision to follow Christ, but we follow sometimes in fear rather than in faith. I want to encourage you to set some memory stones up today. God's been faithful to you, and God has showed himself in his provision for you to be faithful. I want you to make some anchor points in life. Look back at those things. God was faithful in that situation. God was faithful in that situation, and I need to trust him in the future. Maybe today you just need to share your faith with somebody else. He says he'll go with you. Whatever steps you need to take, I pray that you take those steps today. Let's pray together. Lord, we love you. We are grateful for the story of Joseph and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to be your people for this time, to be your people for this place, to know that you will go with us and that you will bring us to be with you in heaven one day. But until then, Lord, just to be faithful, to share your light in this world. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.